Welcome guys back to the Analog Dinosaur channel. Today I'm out here in beautiful Hirvensalmi in the middle of Finland, in the middle of nowhere, in the forest. And I wanted to make a video for you about camera settings. So let's get into it. So basically I'm a very non-technical photographer. I rarely ever think about my settings because since I've been shooting for such a long time, I know my camera by heart. I don't need to think about it because it's intuitive. But before that happens, you need to understand basically what all of these settings on the camera are doing. So this is what I'm going to explain to you. But first, before I get into that, I want to emphasize a very important point. When you're out shooting a photo, what I want to say is 90% of the success of your picture depends on what's in front of the camera. So if you have a bad subject, if your subject is not interesting, if your composition is a bit off, if your lighting is weird, there's not much you can do with the camera settings, okay? But the camera settings are more there for you to control how much light is getting into the camera and to adjust the circumstances. So for example, for today, it's a really bright day, so we would be trying to minimize the amount of light that's getting into the camera, because otherwise I'm going to have too much light in my image and it's going to be overexposed. Yeah, you get that? Okay, so now the four main settings that I'm going to be discussing with you are: first, ISO, second, aperture, third, shutter speed, and fourth, focus. So what is ISO? ISO is basically a scale rating that talks about the light sensitivity of your film or your sensor. And so you have numbers going from 50 to all the way to 12,800 then in the modern cameras. And basically the lower your number of the ISO is, the less light sensitive the film is going to be. And the higher the number, the more light sensitive it's going to be. So what does that mean? And the thing to keep in mind here, the very simple thing you need to keep in mind is when you raise the ISO, you're going to have a grainier image. It's not going to be so clean and smooth as lower ISO. And that's just something that you want to keep in mind. And it might be a compromise that you need to make. If you're shooting in a really low light, you might need to raise the ISO in order to be able to have a faster shutter speed or to close down your aperture, which is what I'm going to discuss next. So the second setting that you need to be thinking about is your aperture. And your aperture right here is it's very simple. It's the size of the hole that lets light into the camera, into the sensor. And since I have a manual camera, for me it's very easy to adjust it. I can show. So this is, for example, is the lowest number. It's f22, and when I open up to f2, is this. This is the biggest size of the hole. So obviously, the bigger my hole is going to be, the more light is going to be getting into the camera, and the smaller the hole, the less light is going to be getting into the camera. And so how does that affect our image? So basically what happens is when we open up the aperture, we're going to get less depth of field. So what is depth of field? Depth of field means, it's used to refer to the portion of your image that's in focus. So when you have shallow depth of field, it means that you have only a tiny portion of the image that's sharp and the rest is blurred out. It's out of focus. But then again, when you stop down the aperture, when you make the hole smaller, what's going to be happening is you're going to increase the depth of field. So you're going to have more of the image in focus. Okay, it's super simple like this. That's all you need to know. And now the third thing that I want to discuss is shutter speed. So shutter speed, really what it does is, let me show you right here on my camera. is that it controls, there's a curtain in front of the film that is preventing light from getting into the camera, okay? And what we can do is we can manipulate the speed at which this curtain is moving in order to control how much light, again, is getting into the camera. So obviously, the faster my speed is, the less light is going to be getting into the camera. And the slower the speed, for example, 1/4 of a second, you can see that it's much slower. So obviously, there's more time for the light to get in to your film. So that's the way it basically works. And how does this affect your image? So basically, what happens is when you have a slow shutter speed, obviously the image is going to be less sharp. If your subject is in motion, the image is going to be a bit blurry. And when you stop down the shutter speed, when you raise it, you're going to have an easier time freezing motion. So your consideration with shutter speed is going to be, how sharp do I want my image to be? You know, do I want to freeze my subject like this, or do I want him to look blurry in the image? So for example, I don't know, if I'm shooting sports, if I'm shooting a basketball game, I'm going to want to have a really high shutter speed. For example, I don't know, a 2,000th of a second, a 4,000th of a second, because I want to freeze the exact motion. But say if I'm shooting a waterfall in a national park and I want the water to look like it's flowing, you know, to make it look dynamic, I'm gonna make the shutter speed slower. So there's gonna be more time for the subject to move in the image, and it's gonna create blur. So that's all you really need to know about shutter speed. That's what it does. And now let's discuss focus. So focus, on most cameras is automatic, and probably on yours as well, but I happen to have a manual camera where I have manual focus. So what happens is that with the focus, I get to determine which part of the image I want to be in focus. So for example, I don't know, if I'm shooting a portrait of a person, I probably want to focus on the person himself instead of the background in most cases. And literally what I'm doing with the focus is I'm telling the viewer, I'm telling you where to focus on the image, and that's your choice. Okay? That's what you do with focus. So that's really it about camera technique. There's really not that much into it, but obviously if you have a really complicated new digital camera, you're gonna have a ton of different modes for autofocus, or you're gonna have, I don't know, all kinds of different settings. But what it really comes down to is these 4 things. And once you know what these 4 things do in your image, you're gonna be on your way to becoming the master of your camera, and you're gonna be driving your camera, and your camera is not gonna be driving you anymore, okay? So here it is, guys. I hope you really enjoy it. If you like it, comment, share, like, subscribe below. And I hope you have a beautiful day. I hope you go out and take some beautiful photos, and have a great day. See you next time. Bye-bye.